So the only difference here is I don't actually have anything to sell. But I am going to spend the 7 minutes trying to help us think about risk differently and how we can make a more resilient business for us all. So first, we suck at managing risk. We've got about 250,000 years of dealing with risks that we know, running away from the bear, don't fall off cliffs, don't eat poisonous mushrooms. But we also have a problem where we're a bit overly confident with what we don't know. And this is because we approach risk like a game that has rules and probabilities. We also rely on historical data to predict the unpredictable future, which is not going to work out very well. And coming from the blue team, I've worked in stocks for a very long time. We believe that if we try a little bit harder with a little bit more money, we can definitely solve cyber, and it's a fallacy. Now, there's a concept called novel risk, and it's something really fascinating from a psychologist of all people. And it's this concept that modernity, our modern world, has introduced a bunch of novel risks from technological advances, scientific innovation, things like that. But it's created these man-made risks that our cognitive brains can't handle. Like, we can do the bears, no problem. But these nuanced and novel risks we just don't handle. And a good example of that, Chernobyl was a failure that was because it was a very novel technology. And if we fast forward to today's world, we got this thing called AI that we're all running to, but don't really know where we're going with it. And there's going to be some messy, dark futures ahead. Next slide. So, of course, there's some risks out there. Technology debt is a major one in the technology factor. Our IT is a patchwork quilt of different technologies, regimes, standards, budgets, everything in between. And what that has resulted in is a very unmanageable and unsecurable environment. Then, no business works on an island anymore. We rely on our service providers, our SaaS providers, and when those things go down, they're going to impact our business's ability to operate. And it's not just a technical problem. The IT as a cost center is this dogma that business has that always looks down that IT is too expensive. But they're failing to realize how important IT is to their business. Their business will stop if IT dies. And the do care or death. So this is the one that's catching many, many businesses by surprise, is that there are external forces that are requiring them to step up their risk management capabilities. And if you don't, you're losing business. And this comes from business-to-business buyers through vendor risk management. It's coming from laws, like privacy laws, regulatory pushes from the SEC that are making businesses have to demonstrate due care, build those security programs. So step one, let's refocus on resilience. So shit will happen. Let's acknowledge that we can't stop every problem regardless of all the cool technology we have. So a patch gone wrong, some people were probably affected by that this summer. Few. The unfixable software, if you have a VPN, that's a device that is code base from about 20 years ago, and every person that developed on that has long since retired or driven their Porsche off to the sunset. That's why we're seeing VPNs be vulnerable almost on a weekly basis. We're going to have breach inheritance. You may not be impacted directly, but you're going to be impacted by your supplier. They're going to either lose your data or they're going to bring the threat in and interrupt your business. And of course, we're human. Bob from IT may make a mistake and drop the business offline. So really, it's not about eliminating risk. It's really about reducing risk and weathering that storm. That's the resilience piece. And what that means is we really need to start innovating on making sure businesses can maintain and adjust to the current world that we have, that things will happen. We can't stop them all. So, before we start running out to the Home Depot, I always use that analog that, we all think we can fix something by buying a tool. So we go to Home Depot and then we end up calling the plumber later. So before we do that, let's understand what the risk appetite of the organization is. Let's understand the critical processes and what technologies are helping versus hindering the business staying online and continuing to operate. And then what does operating that business in a degraded state look like? Can we even operate? And if we can't, then we should be starting to look at how can we make that business operate. Next slide. So step two is building a risk-aware culture. So we need to improve risk literacy. I think that's a big problem. Between lingo, philosophy, and how we treat risk, there's a major disconnect between how the business sees it and how technologists apply to it. And that's because there's a lot of head in the sand that this is an IT problem, when it really should be considered a business problem, because if IT drops, the business drops as well. Next is bringing in governance, and I put a star there because a lot of people might cringe at that, but business risk isn't that new. It's gotten a little bit more complicated with technology, but what we need to do is start formalizing how we're talking about that technology risk and how it will impact the business. And that means developing a North Star of what the business should be doing to manage that risk and what is good enough to make sure that business maintains. And then it goes to communicating risk and resilience. So at the end of the day, risk really needs to be discussed at the top level of the business and pushed down. That's really what governance is we understand risk, this is what we're going to do about it, and now is the guidelines for the business and the IT teams to operate. So formalizing how we talk about that, really defining what a risk appetite is, how long we can really sustain being offline before it becomes a problem, before we start losing money, things like that. And that really is what we call a security program or an information security management system. And then that system helps communicate externally to your stakeholders how much you need to, or what you're doing to protect them and their business. Next slide. So step 3 is building this incremental resiliency. And I will say one of the best tools that I can recommend, bang for buck, is tabletop exercises, because it helps you understand what your capabilities are, understands those gaps, builds collaboration with people, and also builds that muscle memory. Now, a big problem with tabletops is it is sort of considered sort of wishy-washy to a lot of business. The ones that I run, I bring in board members, I bring in executives, because that's when they actually see what actually happens when, whether a cyber or other type of IT failure happens. So what I would recommend is considering bringing that into the culture, looking at how to run these tabletops in a more frequent basis than once a year, once every few years, and really drive home, we are going to have failures, how do we work through them?